Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. We covered the Jedi Temple bombing and the framing of Ahsoka Tano in our last Clone Wars history episode. What we didn't have time in that video to do was to take a look at Barriss Offee, the real culprit behind the attack. What were her motivations and how did she become so radicalized in such a short period of time? Just months before she went from being best friends with Ahsoka Tano to framing her for a crime that carries with it the punishment of death. Now, before we continue, I'd like to announce the winner of our Facebook caption this contest. Skylar, your caption won out of like 144 different comments, so congratulations. I expected nothing less. Barriss Offee, despite looking like a human, just with facial tattoos and greenish skin, was actually a Mirialan. Mirialans were a near-human species that hailed from Miriel, a cold and dry desert planet in the Outer Rim. Like many near-human species found on the edges of the galaxy, it is theorized that these individuals diverged from the rest of humanity tens or hundreds of thousands of years ago. No one exactly knows how they got out there. It could have been the Rakatan Infinite Empire. This was a huge slave-driven empire that basically took humans and spread them out to many different planets. But at least according to legends, humanity started out in the core regions of the galaxy. Aside from their outward appearance, Mirialans weren't all that different from human beings, although from anecdotal evidence, most were very lithe individuals and were flexible and agile. They are also capable of having offspring with human beings, so we're genetically very close to one another. Now, culturally speaking, Mirialans have a very spiritual and deep connection to their home planet and the Force. They developed their own primitive belief system surrounding the Force, and most of their species will continue having a connection and belief with the Force even if they aren't Force sensitive. Mirialans believe that every action they took made a ripple through the Force that could affect their own destiny and the destiny of their entire species. When a Mirialan completed an important task or reached a milestone in their life, they would receive a tattoo signifying that event. Now, not all Jedi were treated the same in the Order. Some species in the Order were given special treatment for one reason or another. One of those species were the Mirialan. In the Jedi Order, Mirialans only trained other Mirialans according to their traditions. And so when Barriss Offee reached the right age and skill level, Jedi Master Luminara Unduli would take her under her wing. This tradition allowed Mirialans to maintain their own cultural and spiritual practices while being within the Jedi Order. This also meant that most Mirialan Jedi were very sensitive to their surroundings. When Barriss Offee admitted to bombing the Jedi Temple, one of the key reasons was she sensed something was off with the Jedi Order's involvement in the war. While other more rational Jedi like Potato Head or Mace Windu might have convinced themselves of the rationality of fighting in this war, more spiritual individuals like Barriss Offee would have relied on their senses and intuition, and she probably could feel that Darth Sidious was somehow trying to degrade and influence the Jedi Order. Although ultimately her decision to bomb the temple was wrong, many, including Ahsoka Tano, agreed with her assessment that the Jedi were losing their way. Barriss Offee was a pretty normal Jedi. She joined the Order basically at a very, very young age, and she had a pretty positive relationship with the Jedi Order and with her master, or so it seems. Luminara Unduli was an extremely powerful Jedi and a very demanding and disciplined master. She mainly used Form 3, the defensive shell lightsaber style, and would pass that on to Barriss Offee. This is a very patient and cautious lightsaber combat form. Luminara would also pass to her Padawan her respect for rules and regulations, along with that caution and patience we were talking about. When it comes to being prepared for a mission, it wasn't uncommon for Master Luminara to have Barriss Offee memorize entire terrain maps before setting out. Because Jedi younglings are ripped away from their families at a very young age, oftentimes their masters kind of become this parental figure, but Master Luminara always kept her relationship with Barriss Offee extremely professional. The reality is most Jedi are not nurtured or cared for at a young age because there is a rule of getting emotionally attached to other people. Now, some Jedi, like Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi, and after them Anakin and Ahsoka Tano, develop very close Master and Padawan bonds, for better or worse. Now, I believe that children who aren't at least given the illusion that they are loved and appreciated at a young age kind of become broken. Okay, to be honest, I've been helping out my wife with her master's in clinical psychology, and One theory caught my attention, and that is the attachment theory. It states that children need to develop a relationship with at least one primary caregiver for them to have normal social and emotional development. Children need to have a safe space when facing stressful situations, and will use caregivers as a base for exploration as they become gradually more bold and begin to discover new things. Now, attachment theory is something that's brought up a lot in the criminology field. There have been many attempts to find correlations between criminal behavior and those who lack that critical relationship when they are young. Most Jedi younglings lack that kind of relationship with a caregiver or parental figure, and so they fall into this category and probably have suffered some severe developmental issues because of the no attachment rule being upheld in the Jedi Order. This could lead to a variety of behavioral issues like violence or antisocial behavior, usually because these individuals at a young age are unable to figure out how to properly deal with stress. Now, Barriss Offee might seem like a disciplined and under control individual, but I would argue that this mainly is due to the repression and restrictive nature of the Jedi Order and her Jedi Master's tutelage, and the fear of being outed for what she really is. Beneath that calm exterior is an individual who is far more troubled and violent than she lets on. The bombing of the Jedi Temple was an extremely ruthless event. It killed 8 clone troopers, 12 civilians, and 6 Jedi. To make matters even worse, Barriss Offee convinced a wife to feed her husband explosive nanites that were the cause of that explosion. Then Barriss Offee frames an extremely close friend of hers in order to cover her tracks. Now, it's easy to make that Jedi excuse that Barriss Offee has just gone to the dark side. But that's like saying someone who has mental illness is possessed by the devil and needs an exorcist. Both explanations are relatively lazy and do not really look at the environmental and developmental factors that have caused this individual to basically go crazy. For the Jedi, a close look at their own failures as an organization is perhaps too taboo for the wise masters in the High Council to allow. So we basically pointed out this issue within the Jedi Order where they don't really nurture or care for their younglings. But an equally serious problem is how the Jedi essentially throw their young ones directly into combat situations at an age where they aren't even mentally developed enough to understand the concept of taking a life. There's a pretty good reason why here on Earth we have many international treaties that bans the use of child soldiers. It's the same reason why military forces all over the world, including ours, depend heavily on young teenage men to fight their wars. All military forces take advantage of the youth and their rage and energy. Young men are much easier to manipulate and more likely to fall into groupthink or fall victim to propaganda and blind nationalism. They're also much less likely to have developed their own worldview at this young age or figure out how to stand up and question individuals in authority positions. Now, a civil society probably wouldn't feed their young and kind of naive men into the meat grinder that is war. And in the case of the Jedi Order, we again see some really troubling signs that they might be doing this exact same thing. Barriss Offee would experience combat before she was legally an adult and be involved in the disastrous first battle of Geonosis right as she turns 18. During the foolish Jedi assault on Petronaki Arena, 200 Jedi had entered the battlefield and only 30 survived. Barriss Offee was one of those survivors, and she most likely saw many of her close friends, many who weren't even adults yet, die right before her eyes. That costly victory would drive the Geonosians and Separatist forces away from the planet, but just months later, the Geonosians would arise out of the tunnels beneath the ground and retake the planet. Barriss Offee would then be redeployed during the second battle of Geonosis, which was equally as costly as the first clash. During one mission in this campaign, behind enemy lines, Barriss Offee and Ahsoka Tano would become trapped beneath a collapsed mountain while trying to destroy a droid foundry. Were it not for the fact that Anakin Skywalker refused to give up on his own Padawan, Barriss Offee most likely would have died. Her own master, Luminara Unduli, had quickly given up on the possibility that she had survived the collapse of that mountain. Continuous exposure to high levels of stress and near-death experiences that aren't rewarded by any real-life actual gains can lead to a lot of disorders. The Jedi during the Clone Wars received almost zero downtime and were constantly being ferried from one battlefield to another until they were essentially killed. One way people deal with overwhelming stress is by disassociating themselves from it. This can be involuntary and it's really just an escape from reality. When Barriss Offee attends the funeral for the victims of the Jedi Temple bombing, she's able to convince Ahsoka Tano that she is saddened by the event and even grieves for one of the Jedi who she had been close to. Later on, Barriss Offee pretends to be a adventuress and attacks Ahsoka Tano while attempting to frame her. In both cases, Ahsoka Tano, who knows Barriss Offee extremely well, is unable to sense her deceit through the Force. I believe that in order for Barriss Offee to continue to operate within the Jedi Order and also be a terrorist at the same time, she might have developed multiple personalities in order to deal with the duality of her two positions. Shortly after surviving the second battle of Geonosis, Barriss Offee would contract a parasite-like worm from the Geonosian Queen, which would take over her brain. Barriss Offee would regain a moment of clarity while trying to infect Ahsoka Tano and pleads to her friend to kill her. This is just another terrifying situation that we can add on the list of terrifying things he's had to experience. On top of that, this probably created some neurological damage that might be long-lasting. Lastly, in Legends, during a mission to Drongar, Barriss Offee took a drug derived from the Bota plant. It opened up her connection to the Force in a very raw and powerful way. During this experience, she realized just how powerful and addictive this drug was and how it brought her very close to the dark side. She eventually kicked this habit, but perhaps the long-term effects of the substance would eventually also drive her to the dark side. Barriss Offee's experience during the war was not unique. I mean, many Jedi Padawan and younglings suffered greatly during the Clone Wars because they clearly were not ready to be deployed onto the battlefield. A lot of the blame, I think, lies within the Jedi Order's inability to understand the situation they were putting these young people in. Now, Barriss Offee might be a criminal and a terrorist in this case, but I think she's also a victim as well because of the situation she was placed in. Well guys, let me know in the comment section below what you think about my analysis of Barriss Offee. Also, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button so you don't miss out on the rest of our Clone Wars coverage. And as usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.